G'day, Nici. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
I'm really well. Thanks so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I know you've had a long and varied career, and it's not always been specifically landscape focused, but I'm interested, obviously, mostly in the landscape genre, Landscape Photography World being the name of the podcast. But we can talk about whatever you want, so don't feel restricted by that. Let's start with what photography means to you. What is it in your life?
I'll just start by acknowledging that I'm here on the lands of the Kaurna people. I live in Yarrabildi, which is Port Adelaide, the land of sleep, which is an interesting way of thinking about where I live. I've lived here for over 24 years, and my family are Barkandji people from the Barka-Darling River in far west New South Wales. But yeah, I think for me, photography it's about country, it's about place, and it's about me being able to make a connection to that place,
Yep.
to think about who walked here before me,
Yeah.
and to try and capture an essence of who those people were and what those places meant to them. So it's really, for me, it's more about going to country that's either part of our own language group or a connection. There's a connection to that place,
Sure.
the river systems that travel all the way through Australia.
Yeah. Okay. I'm really interested to explore that and understand a lot more because for some reason, yes, there are, and I've spoken to a couple, there are a number of Aboriginal landscape photographers, but they don't seem to be very thick on the ground. And I'm really interested because the way that you make that connection to the people that came before and the place, because in Aboriginal culture, as I understand it, and I have a very small understanding of how a lot of place and the importance of the various places that, family groups or clans or whatever you want to call them, countries distributed, those places mean something in both the mythology, but also in the everyday life of people. And I'm really interested in understanding that a little bit more.
For me, I grew up in Canada. Our parents moved when I was 5 years old and came back initially when I was 11, and then we went back again because my father was studying hospital administration. Australia didn't recognise his qualification when we returned to Australia, so he had to go back and do further study. And it's interesting because as a teenager moving to the Riverland of South Australia, it was a long way from the ice skating rinks and the life that I knew as a teenager in Canada.
Sure.
And so I walked around the backwaters of the river and I learnt to drive in those backwaters. And for me, it was a real place of solace. And it was the first place I went to when I wanted to explore my own photographic techniques more deeply. My father had been a radiographer and had dark rooms in some of the homes that we lived in the basements. And I would always be his dish girl doing the printing. I went on at high school and did a little bit more with one of the newsletter that we had for the school.
Sure.
Took photographs for that and developed them. But it wasn't until I left school and I studied nursing initially and then I did the enrolled course, tried to get in to do the 3-year registered nurses course and couldn't get in. And so I ended up traveling around Australia, and it was in Alice Springs. I went to Saturday High School for a nighttime course, black and white photography, and a friend lent me a camera. And so from my early 20s, I started to be a bit more serious about photography.
Yep.
But it wasn't until I came back to South Australia in my mid-20s that I then went to art school and learnt about the history of the world through art, studied fine art photography there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess what is it that inspires you about the places that you're seeing with your camera, and what is it that sort of drags you back to those places?
There's one particular place that I've spent a lot of time at in the Riverland, and there's the Catarapco Creek National Park, which is a really beautiful location, and it's just behind the Gerard Mission, so the Aboriginal mission.
Yep.
And a lot of my friends at school were living at the mission and coming into Glossop to go to high school. Back in those days, I was spending time along those waterways with my friends and going yabbying and just spending time out in that beautiful country. But then I went back, it must have been around 2005, and there was a drought happening that was not only a natural occurrence, it was also a man-made drought through the over-allocation of water to certain groups of irrigators were taking more water than others. And that went on for about 12 years, that whole drought. But I went back, I was back out at Coe Creek and the backwaters, and there was one particular stand of trees that really stood out to me. And what had happened was some local Aboriginal people had rallied the local council to be able to flood that area so that the river red gums could regenerate, because the lack of water was causing all of the saplings were dead. And so this particular location with these beautiful trees was all flooded. And it was one of the most beautiful scenes just to hear the birds and to have that come back to life there was controversy over it because it had cost, I think it was, I don't know, $10,000 or $20,000 in diesel to be able to pump that water into that area. But it ended up being that this is a rejuvenation of country and really important occurrence for that particular area and for the biodiversity of that area. So I photographed that tree on a number of occasions, very early in the morning, later in the afternoon. And what happened was I'd been asked to create a body of work for the Commonwealth Law Court. It's a new building that was being built in Adelaide. That was in 2005, and I was approached in late 2004. And I went to see the site. It was a building site, but the wall was a 12-metre long wall with a 5-metre long wall at the other side. And the gap between the lift and the wall was 5 metres from the lift to the wall. It wasn't a great expanse, and they wanted me to create a body of work for that 12-metre long wall and the 8-metre long wall. And so the first place I went was back out to Catarapco and walked and thought about what it might be that I could do. And all I kept seeing in my mind's eye were panoramic images. And what I'd been doing was cutting and pasting my own images to make them panoramic. And I'd been eyeing off an X-Pan to the Hasselblad cameras. And I thought, I'm just going to put in an order for one with the local photographic store. My father had passed away. I knew there was a check coming for an amount of money. I didn't know how much. And I just ordered it. I thought, I need to have this camera to be able to do this job.
Yeah, sure.
And the camera arrived, the check arrived, and I was about 60 cents short. So anyway, it was amazing. It was just meant to be. So I've always worked with film. I'm still working with film.
Okay.
And they're like 35 mil by 2¼ times the length of the 35 mil neg. And so using black and white film to create the images. And so that was what I did. But what I did was I turned the camera and did them all vertically.
Okay.
Because of the span of distance between the lift and the wall, I thought people won't read them. If they're coming out of a lift and they're the normal landscape format, you won't be able to read it properly. I did a series of 7 images so that you were walking along, and it was out at Eckert's Creek, just also in that same Murray River National Park. And it was as if you were walking along that creek and you got different views of the river as you went.
Okay.
And then on the end wall was that flooded gum. So that beautiful gum tree that was there in all its glory that morning that I first saw it after it had been flooded. And so what I did for that body of work was I enlarged them onto canvas and then hand coloured them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And previously I'd hand coloured only onto photographic paper because I'd always enlarged my images myself.
Yeah.
But the paper was getting more and more difficult, 2005, to actually access big roll paper, black and white matte paper. And so I had the negative scanned, printed onto canvas, and then started hand colouring the first one. And I always used oil paint, but the oil paint with the archival pigment took the pigment off the canvas.
Oh, no. Okay.
So I had to use watercolor instead. And using watercolor, you have to leave whatever you want white has to stay white.
Yeah, you can't
Completely
paint
different.
white on with watercolor. Yeah.
No. And because it's a photograph and I'm hand coloring, I want people to know that it's a photograph. I'm not trying to pretend that this is not a photograph. So the image has to stay there. Yes. So that was an interesting lesson, and something that was, that was a lot, because those images they're big. They're over 2 meters long, just under a meter wide. And so I had to learn pretty quick what to do.
I guess in doing a project like that, were you preconceiving what it was that you wanted to capture before you even started, or were you saying, okay, I've got this wall to fill, what am I going to do?
It really was. And that's how I always work. I go out on country and walk and think and feel. And I was also thinking about the fact that this housed the family court, the family law court, and that people would be under duress coming and going and coming in and out of that. They were in the foyer, so they're not going to miss these images. They're right where they're going to head up to the court. And so it was about giving people a moment of reprieve and bringing that beautiful country into the city and having that opportunity for people to go on a little wander in the middle of their day when they're in a busy city.
Yeah.
So that was the conceptual side of things that I had in my mind. And
Right.
then being out on country and finding this particular location that had a stone weir. So there were a lot of interesting parts that I could then hand colour and bring life to through that medium.
Yeah, cool. In terms of when photography became art for you, was that at art school, or was it already forming into an art form as opposed to more documentary photography?
No, I think it was art school. My dad took beautiful photographs of people. Mainly, they're the ones I remember and that I still have. He had a really good eye, and he also was a real people person. Yeah. But I think for me, my whole understanding of photography as an art was through art school, absolutely. And learning, as I said earlier, about the history of the world through art was just mind-blowing. I had no idea. And it's something that to this day, I can walk into any museum or gallery and feel at home and have a sense of what's going on and be by myself in whatever country in the world and be totally immersed in the culture and life through the museums and galleries that are in those places.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. In terms of what inspires you, how do you stay motivated, and how do you come up with the experimentation that you need to, like finding out that you couldn't use oil paint or whatever on the particular canvases? How do you come up with that stuff? And then secondly, because of experimentation, that means that there are going to be failures. And how do you deal with those failures when they occur?
Thankfully, I haven't had too many failures. So
that's a good thing.
Yeah, but really for me, every project that I work on has a new concept and idea behind it.
Yep.
I did some work for the Shepparton Art Museum. They contacted me, the Friends of the Shepparton Art Museum commissioned me to make some new work for them. And so I went across on, I think it was 3 occasions, I went across to Shepparton and met up with 4 different lots of Aboriginal people, different groups of people through the Land Council, through the local Elders Association. And it was really interesting being able to meet people from that region, mainly people, to go out on country with one of the elders was one of the most amazing things I've been able to do in the Barma National Forest. And just to get a sense of their country and to have that honour to be able to photograph over there was really interesting. And so that was about me connecting with community, but then also me having my own experience and what was it that moved me while I was there. And one of the images that I created was the Mulyawonk. And the Mulyawonk is bunyip. It's like a bunyip type. And as a kid in Menindee, our Auntie Marie and my mum used to say that if you go by the river alone, that Mulyawonk will get you. They'll drown you, just to keep us away from the river, essentially.
Yeah, of course.
But I found this most incredible place just out. It was a gold mine out of Rushworth, and they had the most amazing xanthorrhea growing. They're really large scale, and they were like a Mulyawonk. They looked like people.
Yeah, wow.
I was walking through that scrub with my camera and just focusing on all of these amazing forms and all of the bits that were coming off of them with all the sap and that oozes out of the xanthorrhea, which is used as a glue. When it's heated up, it gets really soft and you can use it to bind things like axe heads to
Yeah.
spears,
Yep.
for example. So that country was just amazing. And I was out there in amongst it photographing, and the little tiny, beautiful little wallabies, that was where they were resting in amongst. So when the first one like ran out of the bush, it just scared the life out of me. So it really was like these were alive. And so I called them the Molliawonk because that's what it reminded me of, what I imagined in my child of what they would look like.
Mhm.
Yeah, but every different project, I've been working on a series called Attesting,
Yep.
and that series I started back in the which was really about the rivers and the waterways. And so flooded gum, that beautiful flooded gum, was part of that series, as well as around beautiful Lake Bonnie or New
Hmm.
Lake in the Riverland of South Australia. That incredible lake I've spent many hours around there and seen the changes that have happened when they stopped the flow of fresh water into the inland lakes from 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah, for about 10 years. That water receded right back because the original lake was a lot smaller. But when the locks and the weirs were put in for irrigation in the early 1900s, that lake became a lot bigger. And so the original shoreline was flooded.
Yeah.
But when they stopped the flow of fresh water back into the lake, the water receded back to that original water. So all those trees that are permanently flooded in that lake were no longer flooded. So I could walk around that area. The signs of Aboriginal occupation were all around me.
Yeah.
Trees, there were scar trees.
Yep.
There was a midden that went for almost a kilometre long.
Wow.
And goodness knows how deep, and just the feeling of people and the campgrounds, and yeah, it was all there, all laid out before us, which we'd never been able to actually see before.
Yeah, it's all flooded.
Yeah, so that has been an ongoing investigation and something that I've consistently worked with because it interests me, and it also, there are so many tales to tell about colonization and the effects of change that have happened, but also that something happened which I found really fascinating, and that is that Barkandji people travelled, as many language groups, most Aboriginal language groups travelled to exchange and to meet other people, come together for big gatherings. And one of the places where those gatherings happened was at that actual site.
Like Bonnie, yeah.
Yeah, and the actual site that I had been photographing in particular at that particular shoreline. And so that made me connect that ancestrally our families walked this country. And here I am all these years later, not sure, thinking that maybe the connection was because of, as a teenager, returning there when we moved back from Canada.
Yeah.
It's deeper than that. It's
Yeah.
much, and so that's where my inspiration comes from. It's from me walking the country, feeling it, listening to it. And there are signs that happen when if I'm in the wrong place, things will happen. Like at that particular site, I was walking further to the western side, and I'd been walking for probably nearly an hour. And there was a tree that I was interested in looking at that had been exposed. And I got to the tree, I photographed the tree, that was all fine. And it was a big birthing tree. And then I went beyond that for about another probably 10 minutes. And out of nowhere, the wind whipped up, the sand was flying around. And so I had to protect all my stuff and just thought, okay. So I turned around and went back, and it just completely stopped.
Wow.
Then years later, I find out that was a men's site, not far from where I was.
Right.
In a bit, like inland, a bit away from the water. But nevertheless, whatever was there was telling me not to go any further, and I was listening.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm interested in how many projects that you have on the go at one time. Obviously, as an artist, there's usually, I know I've got probably about a dozen kicking around at any one time. Not all of them active. Some of them are just thoughts. Some of them are very active, and some of them are sitting waiting for me to pick them up. How do you work with your projects, and how do you select, okay, I'm going to work on this one and I'm going to work through, and that one I'm going to nail. These others I'm going to just sit on the back burner. How do you make your choices around your projects?
I'm usually only working on one thing at a time.
Yeah, okay.
There might be a number of things that I've got on the go as far as exhibitions and other, but bodies of work, I don't have that privilege, unfortunately, because I work full-time as a curator, and I'm also an artistic director of the Tarnandy Festival. I have pretty well 2 full-time jobs plus my art practice. So it's really it's tricky. I find it hard to balance it all. And I just created a new body of work last year, which is in an exhibition that's touring Australia for the next 2 years. And it just opened on Wilyakali country in Broken Hill,
Okay.
which is part of the Barkandji nation. That body of work was from out at beautiful Murray-Darling National Park in the old gorge. And so that's my latest body of work that I created for that exhibition. And that's an exhibition that I worked on with my sister as co-curator, 4 other Barkandji artists. And we very much, for that exhibition, we were led by country. We wanted to include country as part of the conversation. So we didn't go at the project knowing exactly what we wanted to do. In 3 years of us traveling together out onto country to different beautiful locations, Kinchega National Park, Murruwinji, around Broken Hill, as well as in and around the Menindee Lakes. So that project incorporates a Dun who created a most beautiful film with a cinematographer and a composer. There was another photographer involved, Camp Morris. My sister did lino cuts. David Doyle carved and made all sorts of incredible cultural material. And then Raymond Zeta did like a family tree type.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that project was really about us being able to connect with each other, to learn from each other, but to essentially listen to country and then tell the story through the works of art that we created about what we learned along the way.
Nice.
Even though my projects are photographic, they're about delving deep into what are the conceptual ideas about place, and what are these deep, meaningful stories that I'm trying to draw out from this country, and how can that be shown through the work. And quite a bit of my work is really about trying to raise awareness, to give elders within our community a voice, to be able to express themselves and to have a place at the table with the Murray-Darling Basin, for example. And so really it's not necessarily about me, but it's about the country, and it's about how we can work together as a nation to become aware of what's happening, and to collectively try and enable it to grow and live, and for us to still maintain our waterways.
Yeah. I think a lot of your success can be attributed to your ability to communicate, not only visually, but also verbally. I guess in terms of that, how are you trying to express the stories of that country in your work?
I think through the images that I create, and the hand colouring is a big thing for me. It's what I mainly do.
Yep.
I have got some straight colour images that I've worked with as well. But I think it's about trying to evoke the feeling through the colour that I'm adding and imbuing the images with. But I think it's also the writing. So I quite often I'll write about each of the images and include that text side of the work, so that people get a sense of what it is that I'm getting at within the work. They're not just pretty pictures. For me, it's about using this as a platform to be able to extend on the understanding that I have, but then hopefully opening up for discussion with a broader audience.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. One of the things that I'm quite keen on promoting, as well as ethical considerations for landscape photographers in particular, but in general as well. But when they on sacred lands, or they're going to places, as you said, female photographers going to men's places, male photographers going to women's places. I guess one of the things that really needs to happen is that communication, that people find out about where they're going and why those places are sacred, and what to do and what not to do, because there are definite, and that may vary on the place and it may vary from country to country. But I think it's really important for landscape photographers in general to be aware of those issues and take note and operate ethically.
Yeah, yeah. And that's something that I'm very conscious of, and we'll always check in, for example, with the Murruwinji images, just checking in with the elders that I know to make sure that I haven't captured anything that I shouldn't be. It was pretty general where I walked. I didn't go up into the undercrofts because I couldn't actually get up there. Not as agile as I used to be. For me, it was beautiful. I got to walk through the creek bed and I could still hear all of my colleagues and their voices ringing through that gorge as they were like way ahead of me.
Yeah.
It was really a great sense, a feeling of joy. And I called the series Mirrabili, which is happy and contented, because that's how I felt at the time. It was a beautiful day. It was a gorgeous winter's day. It'd been freezing overnight and then it was 25 degrees in the day. I was just on my own, listening to the birds, looking at all the beautiful colours in the rocks. And so that's what I then recreated through the hand colouring process in the work. But it's that joy of being out on country, but also being conscious and aware that this might be a place that I shouldn't be documenting. And if that was the case, then absolutely I would not print those images. So, and not everybody has that opportunity to ask elders that. But
no, that's the unfortunate part, is that a lot of people either don't take the time or that don't have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess also there are ways that you can find out if there's something that's not sitting right with you. You can seek out whose country you're on. Everyone can do that. And
the local Aboriginal councils are usually fairly easy to find. They're not hidden anything.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And I think opening up those conversations is really a step towards reconciliation in a lot of ways as well, because it means that there is more engagement, there is a lot more respect and a lot more interaction between non-Aboriginal and Aboriginal people around those sorts of sites. And to me, I think it's a really important thing for people to consider when they're going into some of these locations that may be sacred. I'm interested to switch now into your curation. So put your curator's hat on and talk a little bit about how you collaborate with the various artists, painters, musicians, or dancers, as you said, to create interdisciplinary projects. How did that come about for you, and how do you find the people that you're wanting to highlight in your exhibitions?
How did it start? Gosh, I worked for 10 years teaching photography at Towndy College, the Aboriginal Community College in Port Adelaide here. And after the first year, I just couldn't believe how incredible the students were with their work. And so together with the other art teachers, we thought, let's have an exhibition at the end of next year.
Nice.
So we negotiated with Tandanya, the National Aboriginal Cultural Institute in Adelaide. And so at the end of each year for 9 years, we had the most fantastic student exhibitions, Towndy student exhibitions, and work was acquired by the Flinders University, Museum of Art, Adelaide University. Really, they just did so well. Then that course was changed. So it was an advanced diploma in applied and visual art, and it went down to the certificate 4 or something. It just went right down, killed it. So I was heartbroken and really didn't feel like I had a place there anymore. And so I ended up going to the University of South Australia, and I wrote a course for them, Indigenous Art, Culture and Design, that to all of the undergraduate visual art and design students. Did that for 2 years, and it was a lot of work because I was between 2 different faculties, the Fine Art School, SA School of Art, and the David Unipen Indigenous Education Research Centre. And I ended up, there was a job going at the Art Gallery of South Australia as a trainee curator. Nice. And I applied for it and got it. And because I thought, oh, this is going to be a way that I'll have more time to do research and do a better job of delivering this information. Yeah, I had high hopes. No, it's been great, but it has been the steepest learning curve I've ever been on in my life.
Yeah.
But I've been there 16 years, so it's a long time. And the galleries taught me a lot, and they've had great faith in me. One of the first things that I did was I was the coordinating curator for the exhibition Culture Warriors, which was curated by Brenda Elcroft from the National Gallery of Australia, touring to many different cities, and we were the first stop. And I learned so much in that 2 weeks installing that exhibition. The next thing I was to do was to curate an exhibition for the gallery from the collection. And so I spent many hours out at the offsite store, pulling apart like racks and looking at paintings, and ended up curating an exhibition called Desert Country. And mind you, I didn't really know what I was doing. All I'd done before was brought students' work together. Really curating it was just bringing what we had together.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Just making the choice. These are the standouts. These are the ones that we're not going to exhibit because they don't stand out. Yeah.
yes, yeah, yeah. So that was how it all started, was just doing it basically. But now, since 2014, we've been running the Tarnandy Festival of Contemporary Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art. That's given us a budget and an opportunity to showcase artists from right across Australia. And the big thing about Tarnandy, it's a Kaurna word which means the first sight of a seed sprouting, or the first light of day, sight of that light of day. So it's about new beginnings and new opportunity. And so I talk with artists and ask them what they're up to and what they might need to develop their work into something more ambitious. Is there something that they've wanted to work on for a long time that they haven't had the finances, or they haven't had the moral support, or do they need to be partnered up with a fabricator, or what is it that they need to be able to achieve the outcome? And we present the work at the Art Gallery of South Australia. There's a major exhibition, a catalogue that goes along with that. A number of artists are also recorded. We create these beautiful artist portraits, moving image artist portraits, with a production company called Closer Productions. So there's a number of outcomes for the artists, and it's a way to really support not only established artists, but emerging artists or mid-career artists. There's no set, it has to be this or has to be that. And that's also the way I approach the work, that I try to get a diversity of work, whether it's photography or moving image or weaving, sculpture, whatever it might be. And so it's a lot of conversation, and in some instances there is a lot of hand holding. So there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of time is taken to really ensure that people are feeling supported and have what they need. And then we also partner, this last Tarnandy last year, we partnered with another 36 organisations across the city and state, and they presented work by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists. So we use this as a platform to help support other people to engage with and work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists. It gives people, there's a lot of people who say they don't know any Aboriginal people, or they don't know how to find people, or so this is just a way of breaking down those barriers and enabling more opportunities, because I can't tell you the number of artists. We've worked with over 6,000 artists since the first festival in 2015. And yeah, there's a lot going on. There's some incredible work happening, and people just need more opportunities. So
yeah, definitely.
That's what the aim is.
I guess you mentioned you're still learning. What's the most important thing you've learned as a curator?
To listen.
Yeah, great.
And actually hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't presume, never presume. This is bound to slap you in the face.
Yeah, that's a fantastic lesson. I really love that. Let's move on to where you like to shoot. Do you have a favourite spot that is always calling you back? And what is it about that spot that you just have to go back for?
I think it's probably a mixture of the Barka, the Darling River. There's a number of places along the Barka. Also, though, it would be Lake in Barma. Yeah. That lake is alluring. It's so changeable. Every time you go, it's different play of light. There's been a lot of change as well to that shoreline, and the way that they clean it up as they seem to think. It's cleaning it up by removing those beautiful big old trees that are the home for many different birds. And
that's it. Yeah.
yeah, it's mad, but they're doing a good thing at the moment. They're stopping people from camping at the like randomly camping around.
Right.
So they're making it so that you have to book and that you actually have campsites, because people were leaving all their rubbish and burning out the trees and madness, all the madness. So that is probably one of the places that I ideally love, and it's not that far from here. It's only a couple of hours as opposed to the Darling, which is 6 hours away, 7 hours.
Yeah, sure. What's the most notable experience you've had out in the field?
Oh gosh, I don't know. A lot.
Any horror stories? They're always good fun.
No, just silly things. Like I remember I was doing it was for my honours year, and I was doing a project, and I'd borrowed a Mamiya 6.7 camera, and I went to set it up and I'd forgotten to connect it to my tripod. I needed the nut that needed to go between. I couldn't find it anywhere, and I was thinking, I can't believe this. I've just traveled 2.5 hours, and I had the day before, and it was a long way to go back home to get that part. And I just went into the local camera store, and thankfully they had one. Like it was a camera store that had hardly anything in it, but they had what I needed, and I was very grateful.
What have you learned about the world through photography?
I think I've learned how to see the world, how different people and how other people see the world. And yeah, just that for me, I just love being able to have something to do.
Yeah.
On my own, walking in the bush. Like I love that opportunity that it gives me to be creative and to be able to be doing something positive and affirming. And I feel like a sense of accomplishment through doing it. So it's really given me that sense. Yeah.
What do you like in terms of planning for a shoot? Do you spend a lot of time? Do you just go out and say, all right, conditions here look good, so the weather forecast looks about right, I'll go and set up there?
It's one of those things that I have to plan it with work to be able to book it in to go away. And so it's quite often I'll book myself in somewhere so that I'm close to where I want to be early in the morning, and then I can go back later in the afternoon. And I will have thought about the actual place, but I haven't always been there yet.
Yeah.
So the first kind of day or so is me getting to know what it's like, how it feels, whether it's something that is going to resonate.
Yep.
Okay. So there's, and some of the places I'm returning to, so I know, and I know that I need to be on that side of the lake for sunrise or.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a mixture, to be honest.
Okay. What about the end of the shoot? Are you straight home, put the card in the computer and get into the editing, or do you like to leave things for a little bit and forget about the experience and come back to it later?
I guess because I'm using film, I'm having it.
You've got a built.
Yeah. And I do use a digital camera just so that I've got a record of day, but I don't usually look at that until I get home. And I'm actually a ludder as far as editing and things like that go. Okay. I know how to do certain things, but I'm terrible. I'm actually terrible.
That's fine. Each to their own. I know people that don't like editing at all, and they just I don't know if it's Photoshop and it's many and varied ways of doing exactly the same thing. There's always about 50.
Yeah, exactly. And
that scares some. To be honest, if you understand how it works, take the time to understand it. It's not that scary.
No, and I've done a lot of different people trying to help me and support me, and it's actually just not my thing.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And if I can have that basic understanding and do what I need to do, that's enough for me at this stage. Maybe one day I'll have more time and I'll be able to spend the time learning. And I've got a really good friend who comes home from the US every year at Christmas, and every year she tries to convert me to
go digital. Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Stick with the film. It's working. I think. I guess the question is then: are you doing your own developing in your own darkroom, or are you sending it off to a lab? Or
I send it to a lab, and I've got a wonderful young woman in Melbourne who scans the negs for me, and then we use the digital file to print from.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm interested in that process of How long do you normally have to? I remember I'd put my film into the chemist or newsagent or wherever, and it'd take a week before you'd see anything.
Yeah, it is about a week because they're not doing as many of developing. So
Yeah.
it does take about a week now.
Okay, so it's about the same. It hasn't
Yeah, it's
changed.
about the same. Yeah, and I'll just get them low res scans, and then once I know what I want, I'll send them over to Bridget to
Yeah,
do
right.
high res for me.
Cool. In terms of printing, are you working with a printer there, or are you doing your own?
No, I'm working with a printer.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I've
Cool.
been going to the same fellow festival. I worked with his father, and now it's
Okay. Wow.
Chris. Yeah, so probably, I've been going there for a long time, over 20 years, probably
Wow.
20 or so years. Yeah, so that's great. I know what I want because of having that darkroom technique behind me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he knows that I'm hand coloring, so he knows how to print my work really. He'll do test strips if he's unsure of a certain area or whatever, and then we'll go in and
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a good relationship with your printer if you're not doing it yourself. If you're doing it yourself, you also have to have a good relationship with. You got to know what you're doing, and I don't. I really don't know what I'm doing when it comes to printing. It's one of the black arts that I can't get my head around either.
yeah, and I've got a man I work with in Sydney as well. He's incredible, Warren Mac,
Yeah.
and he's printed a number of my works for me as well because I'm with Michael Reed Gallery in Sydney.
Yep. Yep.
So
Cool.
they put me onto him when we were making some light boxes of my images.
Have you struck a creative wall or a creative block? And if so, how did you handle it?
I would usually just get myself to a place and things tend to come to me when I'm out on country, and I just start photographing and seeing things and finding things. Because the more I try and push in my mind an idea or try to conjure something up, it's never worked for me. It's just a matter of taking the first step in whatever the initial idea is and heading out. And then it usually comes. Like I did a residency out at Fowler's Gap Research Station in 2011, and it was through the College of Fine Art at the University of New South Wales. And I had no idea. I was out there by myself. My partner drove out there with me and left me there. I was staying in one of the houses on the property, and there were people around. There was the station manager and different people around, but I went out on my own each day. And the place went for 30 kilometres long along the Barrier Range. So there was a lot of like ranges, but then also flat country. And I was overwhelmed by it. I'd never been there before. It was a place that was very new to me, but and so initially I started to get a little bit anxious about what the hell am I doing here? And then each day I went to a different spot and I parked my car and then I walked from there.
Yeah, right.
Slowly but surely, I got the feel of the place and drove up to the high points so I could get a sense of what was below me. And that ended up being a really interesting body of work because it was Wilyakali and Malyangumpa country, just north of Broken Hill, about 112 k's north of Broken Hill. And everywhere I stopped the car, there were stone tool making, like all of the shards of stone tools. And it just felt to me that the ancestors were still around us, that the evidence was all around us of them having been there.
Yeah.
So I called that series of work Having Been There.
Nice.
It's that thing of you think you don't know, you think, what am I doing here? What is this about? And then step by step, just relaxing into it, brought it to life for me.
Yeah, nice. You see as photography's place in society? I know it's a big question, but I'm just keen to get people's perspectives on that.
I think it's really it's more than history. It's more than documentary. It's because it gives us that sense of our social history and the things that we can see through the images tells us about the place, the people. So you get that sense of time. Sometimes images are timeless and other times they're very much of the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think photography is so important for us to be able to connect and to be able to have a record that we can refer to, that not only personally, but also through other people's photography.
Yeah.
Just thinking about family history and
Oh, absolutely.
And looking at those images that tell so much about our ancestors and about the people who came before us that we may not have ever met. But just recently in Broken Hill, one of the men at the mosque, Bobby Sham, showed me an image of our family moving a house on a jinka.
Oh, wow.
And because my great-grandfather was a cameleer who came
Yeah.
from Afghanistan, and there was like, you can't really make out exactly how many people, but there looks like there's about a dozen people. There's a whole train of camels and a
Yeah.
whole house being moved across a paddock.
Wow.
Just to think, wow, can you imagine doing that? And why were they moving the house? What
was wrong with where it was?
yeah, just what that conjures up and
Yeah.
what that tells you about the people that were my grandfather and my uncles and
Wow.
people who I never got to meet, unfortunately.
Yeah, amazing. How can collaboration and community building help in fostering creativity in landscape photography? I guess I'm also interested in how we can support and learn from our peers in the field as well.
Oh, I think I talk about being alone and being out on country alone, but I've also spent a lot of time with my partner, John, and also with my sister Zena. She came on my second trip to Fowler's Gap Research Station, and bringing them in and having not only their company and support, but also as a way to share the experience and the story. I think that for me has been really helpful, and it's something that I hadn't previously done. When I was younger, I would just go on my own. But we have a group of people here in the port led by photographer Tony Kearney, and we have exhibitions in an old 100-year-old flour mill. It's the actual processing part of the flour mill.
Yeah.
And they're just fantastic exhibitions that he curates. He does 2 a year, and one is based on analog photography, and the other one is an art exhibition, and it's based around a word that is something that describes the port. So we've had tar, rust, smoke, number of different titles, and that has really given us all a great sense of community and to have the support of each other, that we all collectively have this outcome that we want to achieve. And the place is full of pigeons and rats. When we're not in it, you have to get in there and clean it all out, set up the lighting. It's a big deal. It's a lot. And then we each have to sit it while it's open. But just a lot of these artists are photographers.
Yeah.
And so it's been really community building, and just it's great to collaborate in that way on the actual exhibition. But I think that as a society, to be able to support each other and have ways that we can enable each other, compete against each other, but actually enable each other to do good work.
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of etc., what do you see as the biggest challenge facing photographers right now?
Dare I say it? AI.
Yeah, everyone talks about that being a big challenge.
But I don't know. I guess I haven't had a lot of experience with it, a little bit through the Ballarat International Photo Biennale, which I joined the board of last year. And we're also developing the National Centre for Photography. So that's something that's really given me great insight, I think, as to how a festival like that operates and how it's very inclusive of people from all over the world. But I think within Australia, it's like a lot of opportunity. It's about finding the opportunities that suit your own practice. That's the way to do it, obviously, but it can be challenging, especially.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I guess, I don't know. That's a big question.
Where do you see the future of photography going? Another big question, but it's
yeah. I think there'll always be a place for it. And I don't know about the whole way that digital images, they look great on your phone and they're so instant, you can share them with everyone. It's the thing of, how does any of that actually have a life? And like, how is that image going? Is that going to be available in 10, 20 years time for my nephew to be able to see that image of that house being moved on a jinka? I guess that's something that I wonder about for the future, and whether, I don't know, digital, that'll change. Everything will change about the way things are stored and accessed. And
I've got to agree. I love to print, and I usually make photo books. Instead of creating the old photo albums, I got behind me in the bookcase down the bottom, it's anchored by about 1.5 tons of old photo albums, old school photo albums. But I've taken to printing a book every so often whenever I feel like it. I can fill it with enough shots. And it's not, some of them are just holiday snapshots. They're not all art pieces, but there's some art pieces in there. And for me, that's something for my children and grandchildren or whoever comes after to be able to have and say, oh, well, that's what he did.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's important. And yeah, I think that's what I like to make books. I haven't made a lot of books, but when I do, it's fun. And it's something, we did that actually for the Ngarratja, for the exhibition that I just opened in Broken Hill with my sister. Each of the artists made a book about family and connection to place, so that when people come into the exhibition, they get a sense of who we are and how we're connected with each other. Yeah, we just did that online, but there's some great results.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
What's the best or worst piece of advice anyone's given you?
I think the best advice was, I had a dear friend who's passed away now, and he led me on my first big photographic project, which was called Nakandi Look. So Kaurna word means look. And it was photographing Aboriginal people to break down stereotypes, really. And it was 1999 that we did the project, and he led the way. It was the funniest thing. We were in a meeting at the State Library of South Australia, and I had only met him in the meeting, like just walked in, and this is Andrew, this is Nici. And they said to us, so you're going to do this project. How many images are you going to create? And he said 100. And they said each, and I said no, together. And he looked at me because he was thinking 100 each. But the thing was, we only had 3 months, and I know how hard it is to work with community, and that we didn't have 100 people lined up to have their photographs taken. So it's not really advice, but it's just something that happened that it was quite funny. But he also guided me every step of the way. He was someone that was really meticulous with organizational skills and recording and making sure that every single image we asked the artist, the people involved to write a statement about their work, about what it was that they wanted the audience to know about
them.
So that was lovely. And that was all recorded. It was all kept really neatly. And there were folders. There was all the things that I was scatty. Things were everywhere. But he taught me how to be organized and to really manage my images once they were developed, once they were scanned. So he really advised me every step of the way and how to be professional with the content. And I owe a lot to Andrew Dunbar. He's an amazing man.
Fantastic. What's the best advice you could give someone starting out in landscape photography?
Have fun, feel it, sense it, and try and capture it from that perspective, and really honor it and respect it. And acknowledge whose country you're on. Find out whose country you're on. That's important.
That's lovely. Thank you. We're going to have to wrap up shortly. So I'm going to ask you who else I should be talking to on the podcast.
Oh, I was wondering about Michael Jalaru Torres.
Okay.
He's from Broome in WA. Amazing photographer. He started a group called Black Lens Photography.
Great. Yeah.
And he's a really wonderful man. Also, I wonder about Narelle. Have you?
No, I haven't spoken to Narelle yet.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's got a show on at Michael Reed at the moment.
Cool.
And who else did I think of today? James Tyler. He's a Ghana artist, really interesting photographer who might be someone you'd like to speak to as well.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. I've got one more question, and it's a very important one for many people in the photographic community. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
I really do.
Nice.
Love it.
Thank you very much for taking the time today to talk to me, Nici. It's been absolutely wonderful meeting you and getting to know you better and learning more about who you are and what you do. Where can people find your work?
I've got a really outdated website, so I'm a bit embarrassed about that.
Don't we all? I actually put some new work on mine this morning. First time in about 6 months.
Well done. And also through Michael Reed Gallery.
Nice. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Nici.
Thank you. It's lovely to meet you, Grant.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com. I'm also selling gear on that website as well. So if you're looking for photography gear, come and see me at grantswinburnephotography.com and see what I've got. I'm also on Vero, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting.